This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news compiled in the early hours of Tuesday, the 6th of February. I'm Oliver Conway with a selection of highlights from across the BBC World Service. Coming up, the political crisis in the Maldives deepens with the declaration of a state of emergency and the security forces entering the Supreme Court.
We also know that police have arrested the former president, Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, who is also the half-brother of the current president, but who is now a member of the opposition.
Also in the podcast, South Africa's governing ANC piles on the pressure, but Jacob Zuma is still refusing to step down as the nation's president. In Syria, government and Russian planes have launched new raids on a rebel enclave near the capital.
The intensification in fighting has seen at least 24 people killed. The warplanes struck the towns of Zamalka, Arba'in, Hazza and Beit Sua. And at the same time, there are also reports that the rebels have been shelling the old city of Damascus.
And
about 230 million years ago, they burst out of what is now South America and expanded rapidly in every possible direction to occupy new land.
But did the dinosaurs spread too quickly for their own good? Find out later. But first, as we record this podcast, the political situation in the Maldives is said to be precarious, with a state of emergency, the security forces occupying the Supreme Court, and a former president under arrest. The opposition says the authorities in the Indian Ocean island nation are carrying out a purge. The escalation in tensions came after the Supreme Court ordered the release of 9 political prisoners, something the government has so far refused to do. I spoke to BBC reporter Olivia Lang, who's a former editor of a news website in the Maldives.
Since the state of emergency was declared, developments have been happening very quickly on the ground. So we have seen police enter the building of the Supreme Court, and it's believed that they are holding the Supreme Court judges there against their will. We cannot verify that, but that's according to the spokesperson for the court. We also know that police have arrested the former president, Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, who is also the half-brother of the current president, but who is now a member of the opposition. And riot police have been deployed at many points around the capital, Male. So we expect more arrests to happen before the night is over.
So a tense situation. Presumably this is all a power struggle.
Absolutely. Essentially, this ruling on Thursday was quite a surprise to the government. It ordered the release of several prominent political prisoners and also the reinstatement of 12 opposition MPs. Now, if those MPs had been reinstated, then the opposition would have had a majority and been able to move forward with impeachment proceedings against key members of the cabinet, not quite the president, but members of the cabinet. Now, obviously, this was seen by Abdulla Yameen as a challenge to his rule. Even though a few days ago he said that he would abide by the ruling, now he seems to be changing tack and he's taking these kind of drastic measures.
And what is at stake here?
Democracy, really, democratic rights that the Maldivians earned only in 2008 with the first ever multi-party elections. And for a few years, it was a kind of shining, rare example of functioning Islamic democracy. Now, that all changed in 2012 when the president was forced from office in what he called a coup. That's Mohammed Nasheed, who's currently in exile. And a year later, in 2013, Abdulla Yameen came to power. Now, he has ruled the country with an iron fist. In a way, he has restricted political protest, freedom of speech, controlled institutions like the judiciary and the police, and essentially is unlikely to let go of power. So even though a few months ago they were saying his administration was saying that they would hold elections later on this year and they would be free and fair, at the moment that looks quite unlikely.
Olivia Lang on events in the Maldives. Share prices in the United States have plunged more than 4% in the biggest one-day fall since the financial crisis of 2008. The decline in the Dow Jones Index extends sharp losses at the end of last week, when strong wage growth raised the prospect of an accelerated rise in interest rates. The market has been increasing for months, fueling concerns that share prices were overvalued. Yigita Lamai in New York has been speaking to traders.
They don't seem concerned that this is going to be a long drawn out thing. What in fact someone said to me was, the market had rallied so much that, it had gained so much over the last year that essentially even the slightest thing would trigger someone to think, okay, maybe I've made the money I could possibly make on this stock. Maybe it's time to sell now. And this trader was telling me that that's perhaps what you're seeing right now.
Yogita Lamai in New York. Two of the biggest players in the modern digital economy have been facing each other in court in San Francisco. Ride-sharing firm Uber is being sued by Waymo, the self-driving company owned by Google's parent firm Alphabet. Uber is accused of stealing trade secrets, but says it didn't use them. Tim Franks spoke to Andrew Hawkins, a transportation reporter for the US tech news website The Verge.
So Waymo is accusing Uber of stealing its trade secrets related to its self-driving car project. They say that there were over 100 trade secrets that were stolen when Uber acquired a company called Otto, which was founded by a former Google engineer named Anthony Levandowski. Levandowski is accused by Waymo of stealing around 14,000 documents and bringing them over to his new post at Uber, which Uber then used allegedly to start its own self-driving car project.
What's Uber's defense?
So Uber's defense is that it never actually ended up using any of these alleged trade secrets. It said that it paid for Lewandowski's company and his expertise fair and square, but then it sort of regrets that decision now. It says that Lewandowski was not a trustworthy person. It regrets hiring him. They've since fired him. Lewandowski is expected to take the Fifth Amendment to plead his right not to self-incriminate. And it seems like what this sort of all really boils down to is that this is a brand new technology. It's not really in use commercially yet, but we're already starting to see big, huge companies, multi-billion-dollar companies like Google and Uber fighting over the rights and jockeying for space in the race to develop these cars. This is an industry that's expected to be worth trillions of dollars someday, potentially reshaping the way that people get around, reshaping the transportation sector. And we're seeing these companies now really sort of coming to blows over the position that they have in the race to develop these cars.
I'm sure you're super qualified to cover a case like this, but I just wonder if you are talking about things that are very, very high tech, how much of a challenge it's going to be for the jury to wade through all this evidence.
I think that's a really good point. And I think we saw some of that happening with the jury selection process when Uber and Waymo both seemed to be interested in eliminating some of the jurors that had technical expertise. There seems to be an effort here to tell more of a story of sort of nefarious doings and less so of a technical story, which actually could end up benefiting Waymo if that's the case. Because they want to paint Uber as an evil corporation that spies on its rivals and conducts its business sort of underhandedly. Uber is obviously going to say, we realize that we have a bad reputation to overcome and we've ousted our CEO. Kalanick is gone at this point. The board has been restructured. We have a new CEO. We're turning the page. It's going to be really up to Waymo to make the case to the jury to see if they actually end up buying that argument.
Andrew Hawkins from the US tech news website The Verge. A day after Jacob Zuma rejected attempts to get him to step down as South African president, his future has been discussed by the ANC's National Working Committee. Many party members think the corruption allegations facing him are likely to harm their prospects in next year's election, and they want him to hand over to Cyril Ramaphosa, who's already replaced him as head of the ANC. But Mr Zuma does have some support still. The party's communications manager, Kusela Diko, spoke after the meeting.
President Jacob Zuma remains the president of the Republic. He obviously would not be president of the Republic if we did not have confidence in him. We are quite aware of the challenges and allegations that surround his position as president of the state, and that is the issues that we are dealing with.
So what happens now? I got an update from our Africa correspondent, Milson Nkosi.
The meeting has ended here in Johannesburg, and it has resolved to call a special National Executive Committee to be held on Wednesday. This is a day before the State of the Nation address, in which President Zuma was expected to be the main speaker addressing the nation. So it does seem like we are now getting to the end, because the National Working Committee, which met, did not have within the party the power to recall President Zuma, whereas the NEC, the National Executive Committee, does.
And is it thought that he's just negotiating the way he'll leave, or is there more to it?
No one has ever said anything on the record, but there is thought that he is trying to get some form of immunity from going back to prison. Now, remember, President Zuma spent 10 years in prison alongside Nelson Mandela on Robben Island fighting white minority rule. So he knows prison very well, and he does not want to go back there, particularly on these allegations of corruption.
Milton Nkosi in Johannesburg. Next to Syria. And Syrian government and Russian forces have intensified airstrikes against two rebel-held areas after a Russian fighter jet was shot down over Syria at the weekend. In the latest attack, nearly 30 people are said to have died in the enclave of eastern Ghouta, near the capital Damascus. There have also been reports of a suspected chemical attack in the northwestern province of Idlib. Syria's government has previously denied using chemical weapons. I asked Nawal Al-Maghafi of BBC Arabic for more on what's been happening in eastern Ghouta.
This weekend, rebels downed a Russian jet in the northern Syria. And what we've seen is an escalation of fighting in northern Syria, in eastern Ghouta and Idlib, and also reports of a chemical attack. But focusing on eastern Ghouta, it's been besieged for years now. But today, the intensification in fighting has seen at least 24 people killed. The warplane struck the towns of Zamalka, Arba'in, Hazza, and Beit Sua. And at the same time, there are also reports that the rebels have been shelling the old city of Damascus from eastern Ghouta, and reports of one woman dying there.
Yeah, there's been intense fighting there for some weeks as the government makes a final push to retake that area.
Exactly. And there's a lot of concern about the fate of eastern Ghouta because of this escalation in fighting. But also, we reported last week, because the area has been under siege for so many years now, and the tightening of that siege we've seen in the last 2 months, there are big numbers of severe malnutrition amongst the children there. So the international community is really worried about what's to come.
Now, there are a few other pockets which the opposition hold, but the other main one is Idlib, and there's been more violence there.
Yeah, so we've actually been focusing on the chemical attacks that have taken place this year. And what we've seen is that there's been an uptick in chemical attacks in the last month and a half. There's actually been 5. And Washington today has expressed its concerns. They say that Syria could be developing new chemical weapons.
And if these reports are correct, why might Bashar al-Assad's forces be using chlorine?
I think they're using chlorine gas instead of sarin, for example, because it's difficult to detect. And so if investigators do make it into the country, it'll be difficult to prove that it was used intentionally and that it was violating international humanitarian law. But one thing that it does do for sure, we saw yesterday it didn't kill any civilians, but it definitely spread widespread fear in the area.
Nawal Al-Maghafi of the BBC Arabic service. This is Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. If you miss any of the week's main events, you can always catch up with The World This Week. It's available to download from our website. Next week, Ahed Tamimi, a 16-year-old Palestinian girl from the West Bank, is to go on trial in an Israeli military court. She slapped an Israeli soldier who was on her family's property during a demonstration. Her mother, Nariman, made a video of the incident, which went viral. Many Israelis see the slapping as a baseless provocation and feel that the soldier showed great restraint. But the Palestinian view is that the encounter symbolises the power imbalance of the Israeli occupation, especially now that Ms. Tamimi and her mother face a jail sentence. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, reports now from the Tamimi's home village, Nebi Salah, in the West Bank.
I'm on a hill in Nebi Saleh, a Palestinian village on the occupied West Bank, about 45 minutes north of Jerusalem. From this hill I can see a microcosm of the conflict, a neighbouring Palestinian village where clouds of tear gas are rising from a minor clash, then across the valley an Israeli military base and a Jewish settlement, illegal under international law. And behind me is the home of Ahed Tamimi, who's become a symbol of the conflict for both sides. Her mother Nariman filmed her slapping the Israeli soldier, and Ahed's father Bassem, a leading Palestinian activist here, is contemplating the fact that his wife and daughter are facing charges that carry years of jail time.
It's hard for me as a father and as a husband that my wife, my daughter, in the hands of my enemy. I am scared, worried, proud. It's like knives in my heart, in my body.
You know, a lot of Israelis have said, in any country, if you attack a soldier, you face the consequences, even end up in jail. They're saying that she shouldn't have done this.
What she should have done under the occupation, to give them a rose and welcoming them, I think our responsibility and duty to resist. She should do what she done, because it's the normal react against a armed man come to your home. The occupation destroy her childhood. She grows up, she feels responsible. The worst issue that the occupation is continue, and she will go out of jail to continue the struggle, and maybe she will kill.
One reason why the confrontation between Ahed Tamimi, the other women, and those Israeli soldiers has caught the imagination of so many people here on both sides is because of what it says about the conflict, about the imbalance of power. A young, very angry, unarmed Palestinian demonstrator facing a heavily armed Israeli soldier. It's a symbol of the fact that despite Israel's enormous advantage in terms of force, weapons, international support, Palestinians aren't prepared to go away or give up. This village, Nebi Saleh, is steeped in protest against the occupation. They have regular demonstrations here which often end up in stone throwing, tear gas, rubber bullets, live ammo too. Everybody in the village has been affected by the occupation.
There is no occupation. There is no Palestinian nation. There will never be Palestinian state, and we didn't conquer nothing. We don't occupy nothing.
Some Israelis are horrified about the prospect of jailing a 16-year-old for a slap. But many more support the soldiers, who could be their sons or brothers. In Jerusalem, here at Israel's parliament, the Knesset, a leading right-wing MP, Oren Hazan, goes much further. Let's talk specifically about Ahed Tamimi and her case. She's going to go to court very soon. Potentially she faces time in prison.
I hope so. We need to send her to rehab from terror. We need to put her behind bars, but we need to teach her how to act. You talk about her like she's just some innocent girl that just slept with a soldier. She do it for many years. She slept with a soldier. She throws stones on soldiers. She moved information to terrorists since she was a kid.
When you saw that video of her slapping the soldier, what went through your mind?
If I was there, she would finish in the hospital, for sure. Nobody could stop me. I would kick her face. Believe me.
She's a 16-year-old girl.
No, I don't look at it like this. Because today, as a 16-year-old girl, she punched a soldier. Tomorrow, she will stuck a knife in his throat. This is what she do. Today, it's a slap. Tomorrow, it's a knife. We need to stop it. This family need to be punished, and punished hard.
The chances are that Ahed Tamimi and her mother will end up with jail sentences. The Israeli military courts usually convict. The occupation has been going on for 50 years and it shows no sign of ending. Incidents like this indicate the level of tension and anger that's often just below the surface. The question is how long before, once again, it erupts into much more serious violence.
Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen. A British man accused of hacking into US government computers has won a legal challenge against extradition to the United States. Lowry Love, who has Asperger's syndrome and depression, could have been jailed for 99 years if found guilty in the US. The maximum sentence here is 2 years and 8 months. The BBC's Charlotte Gallagher was at the High Court in London.
Crowds of Lowry Love supporters gathered outside the court to hear the verdict, holding signs with slogans such as "Trump can't get no love" and "No love for the US Gov." Mr. Love's legal battle began in 2013 when he was arrested for allegedly hacking into the FBI, NASA and the US Central Bank and stealing huge amounts of data. Today, he won his legal battle against his extradition after his lawyers successfully argued that his mental and physical health would be at serious risk in a US jail and he may kill himself. Speaking after the verdict, Larry Love said he was relieved with the decision.
The reason I've gone through this ordeal is not just to save myself from being kidnapped and locked up for 99 years in a country I've never visited, but it's to set a precedent whereby this will not happen to other people in the future. If there is suspected criminality, then it will be tried here in the UK, and America will not try to exercise extraterritorial jurisdiction.
US officials now have 14 days to request an appeal at Britain's Supreme Court. There's also a possibility that Larry Love could be tried in the UK for the alleged offences. The court today urged Britain's Crown Prosecution Service to consider bringing charges against Mr Love.
Charlotte Gallagher. In Australia, a row has broken out over next year's Venice Biennale, the prestigious international art exhibition. For years, a small circle of curators and a commissioner in Australia have selected which artists they will send to take part. Now, for the first time, artists can apply themselves, and some see it as a chance they otherwise wouldn't have had. But some of the wealthy patrons and power brokers are not happy. Our Sydney correspondent Hal Griffith reports.
Summer in Sydney doesn't just mean beaches and barbecues. It's also time for the city's annual arts festival. Now, the programme here offers everything from dinosaur sculptures made with discarded toys to a burlesque show by men with beards. Something to suit, well, almost every taste. But there are changes happening in the Australian arts world, which some of its biggest donors find pretty unpalatable.
This is a very high-profile gig for an Australian artist. It needs to be someone who has been well considered by a panel of curators.
Over the years, businessman Simon Mordaunt has put a lot of his own cash into backing Australia's entry into the prestigious Venice Biennale. He served as the country's commissioner for 4 years. Now that role has been scrapped and the selection process changed, with artists having to apply for the job, much to his disgust.
Most eligible artists who could do the job are extremely busy. They're not going to respond to a newspaper advert suggesting they represent Australia, and they're not going to want to be disappointed by not being selected having made the effort.
Isn't that just pandering to people's ego a little bit, making them feel special? Isn't it more democratic, say, stick an advert in the paper and anyone can apply?
I think representing Australia at the Venice Biennale is the peak of any Australian artist's career. It's not about democracy. Grant making may be about democracy, but commissions, which the Venice Biennale is not about democracy. It's about selecting someone that you think represents Australia and makes a statement about something today.
Simon Mordaunt is one of 2 patrons to withdraw financial support, criticising the Australian Council for the Arts for failing to consult with them. The council says the changes were necessary to fit with Biennale rules, and says the response from artists has been overwhelming. Now, if you think that all sounds like a row within the upper echelons of the art establishment, you'd probably be right. So what, if anything, do Aussie art fans make of it? I've come down to the Rocks in Sydney's harbour to find out. I ventured up an old staircase above a cookery shop to find an art class of enthusiastic amateurs finishing off their paintings. Few have actually heard about this row, but many like the thought of getting to represent their country.
I love the idea because then maybe I have a chance.
You reckon you could do it?
I could give it a go. I would give it a go. Even if I wasn't ready, I would give it a go.
I feel like it potentially can be a bit of a closed world. So any little door that opens is a great thing.
Very fine likeness. Yeah. And I like the way you've retained the coolness.
The man in charge of the art class, Paul Del Prat, is less certain. He's keen to point out the role of the rich patron throughout art history.
They have an equal passion to the people who create, and they are an invaluable part of the art equation. And I'm talking about the benefactors. It goes back, of course, far beyond the great Lorenzo de Medici, who was really the great patron of Michelangelo, Leonardo, so many of the great painters. If you don't have a bit of money in your pocket, you can't really buy art. You can't collect art.
Who represents Australia in the 2019 Venice Biennale will be announced in the coming weeks. But this art world stoush, as Australians like to call it, is likely to rumble on.
That report by Hal Griffith in Australia. Now, they first appeared on Earth some 230 million years ago and quickly went on to dominate our planet.
All over the world, a whole new generation of dinosaurs has been revealed. From the biggest giants and the deadliest killers. From the Arctic to Africa, from South America to Asia.
The BBC series Planet Dinosaur explaining how the creatures spread around the world. But were they too successful for their own good? Researchers at the University of Reading here in the UK have found that dinosaur migration was so rapid, it may have contributed to their eventual demise. Helen Briggs is our science correspondent.
We have about 1,000 species of dinosaurs. We know they prevailed for about 170 million years, which in itself is quite incredible. Sometimes we've only got little bits of dinosaurs. So what they did is they modelled the spread of dinosaurs across the globe from when they started right through to their demise when the asteroid hit. And it seems that about 230 million years ago, they burst out of what is now South America and expanded rapidly in every possible direction to occupy new land. And they were forming new species all the time. Then it seems that they did this really, really successfully. Perhaps, as you say, almost too successfully, because they kind of ran out of space. So this research seems to suggest that even before the asteroid hit, they were in decline and they'd just run out of spaces to spread to, apart from, of course, the dinosaurs that went on to become birds, which are still with us.
So basically there was no food left for them?
Well, it was more that they got too specialised, if you like, for the environments that they were in, and there just wasn't anywhere left to go and evolve and keep on changing. That's the case with animals, and some of them just get out-competed and die out. But it is quite controversial, this, because not everyone believes in this theory. Some people think that they were continually diversing right up until this meteorite impact happened.
Are there lessons for other species, perhaps humans?
Well, I did ask this to one of the researchers. He said you can't really make any sort of direct comparisons, but of course human beings have done a similar thing in terms of taking over vast areas of the planet. But this will be useful for modelling what happens to animals. There's a lot of work around extinctions, because the thing about extinctions, even though they're terrible, dinosaurs actually came to dominance because there was a massive extinction, the Great Dying, before they appeared. They were the group that actually took advantage of that and spread out across the world, occupied all of this new territory. Thing is, though, that after an extinction, it's a very, very, very long time before animals start to recover.
Helen Briggs on dinosaur migration. Now, what do you do if you're visually impaired and want a guide animal, but are terrified of dogs? Well, Digby could be the answer. He's got 4 legs, furry ears, but also hooves and a mane. Digby is Britain's first guide horse, and his skills have just been tested on the streets of Blackburn in northern England. Angus Crawford takes up the story.
Digby stands about 3 foot tall, loves carrots, hates dog food. With his chestnut coat and high-vis vest, he turned heads as he was put through his paces in Blackburn, the home of the man who will soon be his owner, journalist Salim Patel.
I'm registered blind. I've lost all my sight since I was 15. I've got very little left, and for most people, a guide dog would be the answer, but sadly I've got a really big phobia of dogs, and Digby's the alternative.
Digby took a trip to Mr. Patel's office at the BBC when shopping in the local supermarket and, according to his trainer Katie Smith, passed every test with flying colours.
I am so pleased with him, the way he's coped with the travelling, the way he's coped with going into the studio for the radio and then out on the streets and going into the market and having a cup of tea and also a slice of toast.
For the moment, Digby is still very much an apprentice. Before he can trot into action by himself, he needs at least 2 more years of training.
A report by Angus Crawford. And that's all from us for now. An updated version of the Global News podcast will be available to download later. I'm Oliver Conway. Until next time, goodbye.